Welcome back to week 2 of our online Bible study. As we continue in our theme verse of 2 Chronicles 7:14, we're going to spend a week looking at humility. This is such a core concept to Christianity, and yet it's often misunderstood by Christians. Even for me, when I think of someone who's humble, I often think of somebody who's got low self-esteem. And having low self-esteem is actually close to the definition of humility. Really, it's just close enough to create huge problems if we don't address that head on. When I think of a good biblical place to start, when I question the concept of humility and how it's different from low self-esteem, I think of our examples of humility. In the Old Testament, we have the example of Moses. Moses is this guy who gets angry when people don't listen to him. He's a guy who can be showy about God's power. He's even bold enough to ask God directly to show him his glory. And the Bible says that he was the most humble man on earth at that time. In the New Testament, our greatest example of humility is Jesus. Jesus, who in John 10 tells us that he and the Father are one. So if humility is low self-esteem, there's nothing less humble than telling people that you're God, right? So we have to see that whatever this humility thing is, it's not low self-esteem. Now, I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I actually kind of skipped those classes in seminary. But I have some friends who are, and I've read work by some people who are, and I've learned that there are two related words in Hebrew that are translated into the English word humility. The first word, which I'm not even going to try and pronounce, is a word that is used in our main verse, 2 Chronicles 7:14. And this word is a variant of the word that means submission. So it seems that when God is calling his people who are called by his name to humble themselves, he's calling them to submit themselves more completely to him. So in this case, humility isn't about low self-esteem, it's about knowing that it's not about me. I'm not in control, I'm not in charge. God is in charge. So Jesus, even though he's God, still reminds us repeatedly in John that he only does what he sees the Father doing. He only says what he hears from the Father. So Jesus really can be our model for humility. The other Hebrew word that is often translated as humility is closely related to the first and also doesn't have anything to do with low self-esteem. It's a word that means to recognize that we're in over our heads. We're being called to something that is bigger than us, beyond us. This is the type of humility that the Bible says Moses had. It's not that he went feeling like he wasn't a good leader. He just realized that even as good of a leader as he was, the task of taking a huge multitude from 12 different tribal backgrounds and all of the immigrants that were with them and making them into one new and distinct people group in the world, that was a task that was beyond him. Either that is something God's going to do, or it just wasn't going to happen. So for us, when we speak about humility, we should keep these two ideas in our minds. Humility means that this job that we're being called to do, to be God's people in the world, called by his name, known by the same actions that he's known by in the world, this task is beyond our ability. We're only going to succeed in it by submitting to someone bigger, to something bigger. If we make the story about him and not about us, we've got a shot. I've heard it summarized that humility isn't about thinking less of ourselves. It's about thinking of ourselves less. So how does this more nuanced view of humility change or challenge or agree with your first impression of what humility is? What's another example of a humble person that you can think of from the Bible or from your own life or from history? Someone who you'd like to emulate, you'd like us to emulate. Give me your thoughts. Post them in the comments below, and let's get this discussion going.